Good morning, readers. Well, it is launch date for Captured in Death, book number 10 in the Kenzie Kirsch Medical Thrillers series. And in this story in the series, then Kenzie has quite a dilemma. She's trying to solve a murder that she has no body and she can't prove is a murder. So she has only a photograph to go from in her investigation, and you'll just have to read to find out where she goes from there. T. Olson says, easy to read, entertaining, and interesting. Candy says, some books take you a chapter or two to really feel invested, but this one got me at page 1. I love the series and the characters. This storyline had me holding my breath at times, waiting to see what was going to happen next. Rosemary says, P.D. Workman's relatable characters and believable storyline will draw you straight into the heart of the action. As usual, I'm going to give you a reading from the first chapter of Captured in Death. It wasn't the way Kenzie's cases normally came to her. As an assistant to the medical examiner, she was used to bodies being brought in by van, laid out on the table and cleaned, ready for her to begin her post-mortem. She would have some scene notes to peruse, or if she'd gone out to the scene herself, she would have dictated the notes. Maybe she would be by herself, or maybe with Dr. Cook, who was substituting for Dr. Wiltshire while his broken hand was healing. A very different scenario from the one she currently found herself in, sitting in the visiting area of the psych ward with Reese sitting across from and Zachary next to her. Kenzie pulled her eyes away from the photograph on the phone she held in her hand to the serious black teen who had handed it to her and waited for her to say something. Reese, this needs to go to the police. They need to investigate. Do you even know who this is? Reese, non-speaking as usual, spread his hands apart, palms up, in a gesture of helplessness. Don't know. Zachary leaned in to look at the picture again, his face close to Kenzie's, so she could smell his shaving cream. He usually sported a 3 or 4 day growth of beard, which made him look like a homeless person, or at least someone down on their luck. Someone people didn't want to make eye contact with and would forget as soon as they walked away. As a private investigator, he didn't want people to remember him, but today he happened to be clean-shaven. His dark eyes were intense as he stared at the photograph. He ran a hand over his close-cropped dark hair. We don't even know if it's real, he pointed out. It could be stage makeup. Kenzie didn't have to look again at the grayish skin or the bullet hole in the man's forehead to know that this was no makeup job. She'd seen enough corpses in the course of her work to recognize one when she saw it, even in a picture. He's dead, she told Zachary with certainty. It's real. Reese nodded his agreement. His dark skin kept him from looking pale, but his expression was pinched and worried, his frown deeper than usual. He'd been through an ordeal, a mental collapse apparently triggered by this very picture, followed by a reaction to the drug used in the experimental treatment program he'd been placed in, and then finally sedated to let him catch up on the sleep he needed and get back on track again. It had been over a week since Stanley Grain had found him wandering in the street in a fugue state, and if that fugue state had been triggered by viewing this picture, then the man in the picture had been dead for over a week and still hadn't shown up in the morgue. Maybe he never did. Maybe his body had been dumped somewhere no one would find it. Reese held out his hand for his phone. Kenzie shook her head, not giving it back to him. This is evidence. The police will want to look at the photograph's metadata and any other evidence on your phone. Where you got it from? Kenzie raised her eyebrows, asking again for Reese to tell her where he had gotten the picture. How did a teenager end up with the picture of a murdered man on his phone? Who had sent it to him, and why? Reese looked frustrated. Maybe he wanted to text her something on his messaging app. He relied on his phone for communication. He couldn't tell his story to her in gestures and facial expressions. Some things could be communicated that way, but he needed something more. Kenzie slid her own phone across the table to him. Send messages to Zachary's phone, she prompted. Reese picked up her phone with long, slender fingers and operated it quickly. He found the messaging app he wanted, swiped and tapped rapidly with his thumbs, and the first message popped up on Zachary's phone in a few seconds. Zachary held it so that he and Kenzie could see it at the same time, their heads close together. Reese had sent a picture of a dog, a recurring theme in his messages. This one was a cartoon picture of a basset hound dressed in a Sherlock Holmes deerstalker hat and peering into a magnifying glass. Kenzie nodded. I know you want me to look into it, to find out what I can, and I will, but this is a police matter. They'll have to figure out where the picture came from and who it is. Until I actually see the body, there's not much I can tell just by looking at the picture. Reese pointed to the picture of the dead man, rolling his eyes. What other information did Kenzie need than the fact that the man had been shot in the head? Wasn't that enough to determine cause and manner of death? It was glaringly obvious. Then what was he expecting her to find out in her investigation? Was she supposed to be able to tell from the photograph who did it? Why? Okay, yes, she said as patiently as she could. I can see that he was shot. Cause of death. I can't issue a medical examiner's report based on a photo. I don't know who it is or the circumstances surrounding his death. I mean, I do issue reports on John Doe's, but it still needs to go through official channels for me to do that. I need human remains. Who did you get this from? Reese shrugged and made the ASL sign for friend, both index fingers hooked together, a well-known sign, even though he did not generally use ASL to communicate, but relied on his own gestures and the phone pictures and short texts to get his message across. A friend from school? Zachary asked. Reese nodded. And do you know where he got it from? Reese shrugged. He'd already communicated to them that it was something that had been circulating the school. His friend had gotten it from another friend who had gotten it from another friend. What are they saying about it? Kenzie asked. They're not just sending it around by itself with no explanation. He pointed at the picture at the He pointed at the phone and made a gun shape with his hand, complete with a jerk showing the gun had been fired. What? Zachary asked. Here's a picture of a man who was shot? That's it? Reese nodded. Kenzie wanted to search through his phone to see who it had come from and exactly what the attached text had said. But she didn't want to touch anything that the police would want to look at. It had probably been sent through an app where the message self-destructed, and all of the information was gone. But maybe the police text could pull information that had been deleted but not overwritten. There was just one thing she needed to do. If Reese wanted her to investigate the man's death, she needed a copy of the picture. She didn't know what she could do for Reese, but he needed to see that she was doing everything she could. He had trusted them with this information that he hadn't shown anyone else, and he was counting on her being able to make everything right. She didn't know if she could do that, but she would do everything she could for him. So, what are you waiting for? Get your copy of Captured in Death today and find out how Kenzie Kirsch solves this unsolvable mystery. Like all of the Kenzie Kirsch mysteries, you can read this as a standalone book, but it's more fun if you read the rest of the series as well. You can start with Kenzie Kirsch's origin story in Unlawful Harvest, or you can get books 1 through 7 of the Kenzie Kirsch Medical Thrillers series in one package, or you can get those 7 books plus the first 10 books in the Zachary Goldman Mysteries series, which intertwines with the Kenzie Kirsch storyline, all in one package. So head over to my e-store to pick those up today.